All right, how is everyone doing today? Welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel. We try to turn you on to great theories of everything, all-encompassing theories, grand unified theories, cosmologies, also magnum opuses and tour de forces and earth-shattering discoveries, generally mostly emanating from obscure sources and some ancient, some modern, and we've taken a look at the ancient Egyptian tree of life for about 300 videos, and we do very deep dives. And about almost 600 videos on the reciprocal system of theory from Dewey B. Larson. And that is my all-time favorite. Great theory of everything. I think it's the most comprehensive and the most elegant. He really unifies all the major fields of science, as well as unifying science with religion. And so we're taking his name here, the reciprocal system, and applying it to the next unit that we're doing called the reciprocal church, where we try to find, we search out and find many different forms of spiritual practice, syncretism, different kind of do-it-yourself religion, building your own religion. Every individual has their own individualized religion. Everybody puts together what works for them. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. So we're looking at, great theories, people who spent their whole life working on something, or at least a big chunk of their life working on something in the shadows, never really getting recognized, never really getting paid, but doing it for the principle of it. And we all know those are the best motives, and that's the most likely way you're going to get somebody who is pointing in the direction of the truth. And we've gone over a few different approaches: a deep meditation for rarefied states of consciousness, also intense endurance training for the same, and ecstatic music. We're going to get into some ecstatic drumming, shamanic drumming, and music theory, along with sacred geometry and mathematics. Maybe a little bit of the astronomy, astrology stuff. Possibly dabble a little bit into magic squares, and maybe other kind of forms of games, spiritual games, and kind of ground it all out with the Dewey Larson's reciprocal system. I think there's a few things I'm forgetting, but the reason why we're putting together all these different spiritual sources is because we recognize the future. We see the writing on the wall, and the writing on the wall is that the 5 major Western religions are all in their collapse phase. They all are about to fall apart. Very few people see it coming. But according to my research, I see it coming in a big way for at least 2 of these major religions. When I say 5 Western religions, I'm referring to Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Satanism, and atheism or scientism. And really, Satanism and Christianity go together. Satanism is basically Christianity's evil twin. Neither of them really existed until the New Testament. The Old Testament just refers to Satan a handful of different times, and every time it's referring really to a human being who is an obstruction, an obstacle. And it doesn't acquire any type of supernatural following until the New Testament. And of course, the Satanists generally use the Bible as their, you know, source. So that's another thing that, you know, goes against Christians is they think they've got this this Bible that gives them all these beautiful aphorisms and verses that teach you how to live. But what they're not really looking at is that that it also gives you a whole lot of really evil, vile, perverted, violent people who are only doing it because they hate you, you know. So, and it's coming from the same book. And when you see that it's coming from the same book, it also shows you how things can be read in several different ways, and that these holy books, especially the New Testament of the Bible, is layered with different meanings. One group of people can take it as the most pious, you know, enlightened way of looking at it, you know, with a stoic, you know, approach and selfless approach, nonviolent approach. And then another group of people can take it as, you know, gay pedophile pornography combined with animal and human sacrifice. So, you know, the Christians don't really recognize that they're bringing that on by the way that they're going about their pious lives. For whatever reason, is causing this other group of people to hate them so much that they pretty much have like what you would call maybe like Christian derangement syndrome. And they, you know, do all this evil stuff just because they hate you. And unfortunately, they, you know, I won't say unfortunately, but it has wide ramifications. I mean, they hate the Christians, but a lot of their violent and vile acts affect non-Christians as well. So, you know, when we as non-Christians have to look at this, we have to assign some of the blame to the Christians for this. Because I mean, it's not blame, but just basically saying, well, if you didn't have that New Testament, then they wouldn't have it either. So we're going to try to kind of debunk both of those things here in this group of readings, the New Testament Decodes. And we're looking at the work of Michael Menescot's, his new book that came out late 2024 called Christianity's Origins as a Flavian Secrecy Cult. And he's one of many emerging scholars who have come to the conclusion that the entire New Testament, or at least in Menescot's case, the Gospels, was written by the Romans. It was written by the Caesars. Rome controlled Judea at this time in the first century, and they had been fighting the Jews off and on, mostly on, for the last 150 years, going back to all the way back to the early second century BC, and throughout the first century BC, and now in the first century AD, they fought this war against the Romans from 66 to 73 AD, called War of the Jews, which is documented by the so-called historian Josephus. And the Romans were masters of war, in particular, masters of war propaganda. And so that's what the New Testament is. It's a psyop, psychological operation performed against the Jews. They were tired of the Jews in so many different ways. Their separatism, their xenophobia, their strictures against graven images, which prevented them from putting Caesar in their temple in any way, even on coins. And, you know, their just overall zealousness, willing to die for their idiosyncratic beliefs of their idiosyncratic God. And just kind of they had to have their animal sacrifice, they had to do their circumcision, they had to have their kosher food, they had to drain all the blood out of all of the meat they ate, and all of this. And they had some of the laws are downright, out of Deuteronomy and Leviticus are downright, what is this all about? How can you and all of it was very much of a chosen people kind of thing. Like, it's not okay to loan money at interest to another Jew, but it is okay to loan money at interest to somebody else. So I suppose, but anyway, the Romans didn't like it. The Romans were tired of it, and so they decided to write a series of books, small, short books of this new hero that they had come up with, a Jewish hero and even a Jewish savior who believed in turning the other cheek to oppression, who believed that they should render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, who saw himself as the Prince of Peace, who wanted to walk an extra mile with your backpack on his back if you were a Roman soldier, and who believed that the Roman slave owner has the greatest faith in all of Judea, and many other cockamamie things that Jesus says in the New Testament that are all pro-Roman and anti-Jew. When you first hear this Roman hypothesis of them writing the Bible, it can kind of take you aback a little bit, but think about it more and more and more and more, and it's utterly obvious that this is what happened. The Romans had a monopoly over really education, literacy. They were really the only people in the position to even write this stuff in Greek, and then also to publish it. The Romans were the only people the Roman Caesars were the only people publishing anything at this time. And they were the only people that were distributing it at this time. Each one of these Roman royals had like a bunch of slaves who were scribes. They were like, as Roman Piso calls them, human copy machines. How else one of these Christian scholars is like, how many copies of the gospel have been found over time? And the answer is like 5,000. Do you think a bunch of semi-literate Palestinian or Judean apostles of Jesus are going to have enough resources to put out 5,000 copies of the gospel that stand the test of 2,000 years of time? It's ridiculous. So anyway, what Michael Menescotts does in his book is he has takes the book of Luke and he puts it on the vertical axis. Then he takes the book from Josephus called Wars of the Jews, or also called Jewish War, and puts it on the horizontal axis. And he crosses them, and he tries to find parallels between the two, because many of them have been pointed out by people like Joseph Atwill. And going back further to also Abelard Reuchlin, Roman Piso, James Valentine Hannay, Sir Ronald Syme, Bruno Bauer. These people have all pointed out, parallels between Jewish War, which is literally like the second most popular book of all time, and the Gospels, the most popular. And the thing is that it becomes quite clear that whoever wrote Jewish War, it's supposed to be by Josephus, also wrote the New Testament. because there are so many parallels that they really can't be explained away. Just in the book of Luke, Menescot's found 250 parallels. Now, some of them are cheap and some of them are, weak, but some of them are devastatingly strong. Many of them are devastatingly strong. And when he graphs them all out, every time he finds a correspondence, he puts a dot there on his graph paper. Luke 1 through 24 on the vertical axis, paragraphs 1 through 694 of Josephus on the horizontal axis. Then what you get after you do that is you get 5 Latin letters, APTVS or APTUS. That is AP, I believe, is Arius Piso, but it could be Aegon Numa. TV is Titus and Vespasian. Titus was the Roman emperor, son of Vespasian, founder of the Flavian dynasty. What Christians don't know about Josephus, they think that he is the kind of a favored character because he is the only really corroboration of the Gospels that was writing in the first century. But what they don't really tell you about Josephus, because they haven't taken any type of even shallow dive on his life, is that he was a member of the Roman royal family. He lived at Caesar's palace for many, many years, and during the time that he's writing War of the Jews. You can read that in his autobiography. And so, of course, he's going, if he's part of the PSYOP, he is going to include in his writings something that corroborates the PSYOP. And this is the same. This is also true of all the second century characters who also corroborated the existence of Jesus. That includes Tacitus and Suetonius and Pliny the Younger and Trajan the emperor. These people were all Roman royals. Those are the only people that corroborated the existence of Jesus. So what Josephus, whoever Josephus was, Arius Piso, or an amalgamation of Roman and Romans along with Herodians, Herod, the family of Herod, who are kind of Hasmonean Jews who were puppets of the Romans. And they fled to Jerusalem here in the late 60s AD. And they might have been responsible for some of the writing also. But whoever did it, what they did is they backdated the story of Jesus by 40 years from when the temple was brought down by the Romans in 70 AD. They backdated the story of Jesus, and the story of Jesus, his 3 years of his ministry in Judea, runs parallel to Titus's 3 years of his military campaign in Judea. And every time, not every time, many times when Jesus prophesies something here, it is fulfilled by Titus. Jesus prophesies it in symbolic language or in a parable, and Titus fulfills it literally. Jesus predicts it at a certain location. Titus fulfills it at that exact location. Jesus prophesies something at a certain time. Titus fulfills it 40 years later, sometimes to the day and even to the hour. 40 years separate. Now, you could say, well, that's because Josephus wrote later than the Gospels, and he programmed everything to fit perfectly with what Jesus predicted. Well, that could be true, except that Josephus is a lot of times is parodied by the Gospels. So not only is Josephus parodying the Gospels, many times he's being parodied by the Gospels, meaning that they were written at the same time by the same people for the same reason. And Menescot goes over this. So I think the devastating part of his evidence is the 250 parallels between the book of Luke and War of the Jews, and the fact that those 250 parallels make 5 Latin letters. Latin obviously being the language of the Roman royals, meaning that the Roman royals literally signed their name to the book of Luke. If you want better proof than that, I'm not exactly sure where you're going to find it. Especially all of you followers of the 17th letter, truthers and diggers and anons who dig into absolutely everything, but haven't even lifted a finger to figure out what's going on with their religion. You know, at most, you guys are at the point where you're saying, oh, well, let's look at some of these other books of the Bible. There are really 777 books of the Bible, not 66. And so we have to look at all of these books. Why don't you figure out what the origin of the books actually is? This is like PSYOP 101. So anyway, let's get into Menescott's arguments here. Now, what he really says is that the Roman royals tried to create this as a Flavian secrecy cult. So at first, your first level is that you see Jesus as kind of like a hero. Then you see Jesus as a god. And then you recognize that Jesus is actually predicting things that are fulfilled by Titus. So Titus is the second coming of Jesus. So really, they're both gods, but Titus is kind of on a higher level. And then finally, you figure out that the Jesus story is total fiction. And so you are now roped into what he calls pure emperor worship. Okay, so that's what he's going to talk about here. And then he's going to go in and talk about the Essenes a little bit. Now, the Essenes were the group of people identified by Josephus and a few others that were a kind of a very ascetic sect of Jews that many people think that Jesus was part of. Okay, so we can regroup the ranks who are not allowed to fraternize. So the Essenes had 4 different groups that were not allowed to fraternize with each other, apparently according to Josephus. First rank, followers of Jesus as a miracle worker and prophet. Second rank, believers of Jesus as God. Third rank, believer in Emperor Titus as the second coming of Jesus and in the Flavians as supreme gods. And the fourth rank, pure Flavian emperor worshippers, a supreme Flavian god or APTVS embodying all other gods. The Essene will be familiar to many readers since Christians frequently think that Jesus must have been an Essene leader, and rather laughably that the Qumran settlement, now that's where Qumran is about 20 miles from Jerusalem to the southeast, and that is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in a series of caves there in Qumran, on the western shores of the Dead Sea, and that's where this group of people who wrote the Dead Sea Scroll. Now, the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in the 40s and 50s of the 20th century, 1900 years after they were buried there. Apparently. And what we have is a bunch of old Jewish writings, copies of every book of the Old Testament except for Esther, I believe, and a lot of other stuff too. Most of it's written in Hebrew, some of it in Aramaic, just a smattering of it's written in Greek. And they seem to be very devout, but not very zealous. They don't really believe in violence. And they seem to be very ascetic, but their writings have absolutely no reference to Jesus in them. But the fact that they were discovered at such a late period kind of means that we don't know that much about it, especially since they were only discovered like 80 years ago. And they really didn't even get into the public, scrutiny until 1990 or so, because a bunch of Jesuit priests or Dominican priests kind of obfuscated the whole thing, because they started translating these things and recognized that they didn't say what they wanted them to say. So they just sat on them and refused to translate them, or at least refused to reveal what they said. And so, okay. So that the Qumran settlement is evidence that the Essene existed. The Christian need to assert evidence that the Essene existed can be readily understood, since if the Essene exists, then Jesus' teachings can be seen as linked to an existing philosophy. And if the Essene didn't exist, then Jesus' doctrine seems to rather awkwardly come suddenly out of nowhere, which is actually where it came from, like it came from the Romans. I'll start with the Qumran settlement near the Dead Sea, since there are still people who believe the relentless Christian propaganda arguing that it is an Essene settlement. To deal with it very briefly, it is rather telling that the team who discovered the site announced that it was Essene before digging it up, and indeed before analyzing the famous collection of religious scrolls found there, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Their evidence largely consisted of the observation that, as is compatible with the stated Essene practices, there were pools of water that could be used for communal bathing, although these were more likely needed for storing water in the desert, given that the nearby Dead Sea water could not be used for drinking, and also evidence of communal eating, which is of course commonplace in many small communities. The location of Qumran is often asserted to match the vague region offered by one source as to where Essene settlements had existed. However, the region in question is huge. It's a significant portion of Judea, encompassing Jerusalem and surround. To assert this as evidence that the site is Essene is not only quite obvious desperation, but Qumran can be seen as lying somewhat outside of that region anyway. Over the years, a mounting body of evidence has steadily emerged that contradicts this idea that Qumran was an Essene settlement. This included strong evidence of a non-vegetarian diet, cooked animal bones, and of women and children being buried there, which are both at odds with supposed Essene practices, because they were like celibate. But there is a decisive factor. The one thing you'd be guaranteed to find in, say, a Christian library of religious documents is some mention of Christianity and its beliefs. Indeed, almost every book would be about nothing else. So the clincher is that not a single scroll in their extensive library of religious scrolls turned out to be about this supposed Essene cult. And indeed, not even a single scroll mentions the word Essene. Case closed, he says. And I generally agree, although I wouldn't go as far as case closed, because this is history that happened so long ago that, we might be missing something. So I'll always be open to a different interpretation, but I agree with him in general. But challenging the provenance of Qumran is not my point. There are reasons to doubt the truthfulness of the three original sources that assert that a sect called the Essene existed, or at least not one with the extreme pious doctrine that the sources claim it had. My first reason is that there are only 3 documents claiming first-hand knowledge that this Essene cult existed, and all 3 are suspicious. A key reason to doubt them is that all 3 of these writers are intimately connected with the Flavian emperors, as follows. 1. Jewish War by Josephus, whose author was intimately connected with Emperor Titus. The primary source for the Essene cult is Jewish War by Josephus, whose stated author Joseph ben Matthias, admits to having such a close relationship with the Flavian emperors that they gave him freedom, great gifts, lands, and tax-free status, with him adopting their Flavian name. He is known as Flavius Josephus. In the words of Josephus, which we already know to contain fiction, its claimed author, Josephus, says he was a member of the Essene. This makes this very dubiously honest source the only one claiming to have been a member of the Essene or even of having visited an Essene settlement. There are some historians who have speculated that Titus's lost memoirs of the war were used as a source for Jewish war. This book will show how close to the truth this is. Source number 2, Philo Judaeus of Alexandria, who was intimately connected with Emperor Titus. The second source for the Essene cult is Philo of Alexandria, who is recorded as being part of a delegation to Rome. Jewish war details how Philo's nephew equals a prominent figure in the Roman Empire, had led the Roman forces to destroy Jerusalem alongside Titus. That's his Tiberius Alexander, who was a defector. Philo is a Jew, but his I think his nephew, defected to the Romans, and he fought alongside Titus. Emperor Titus and Philo's nephew Tiberius had worked together to lead the Roman legion to destroy Jerusalem. If that wasn't intimate enough, Berenice, Titus's famous lover, had earlier been the lover of that same nephew of Philo of Alexandria. So these people were like incestuous and together. I mean, and the Roman attitudes toward debauchery are obviously very well known. Okay, source number 3, Pliny the Elder, uncle of Pliny the Younger. Pliny the Elder, who was intimately connected with Emperor Titus. The third source for the Essene cult is Pliny the Elder, who describes how he had a close friendship with Emperor Vespasian, Titus's father, and an incredible career leading to him commanding the entirety of Vespasian's imperial, I don't know if that's the right word, navy. We can be sure he continued a relationship with the Flavians after Vespasian's death, since he dedicates his biggest work to Titus's younger brother, Emperor Domitian. Okay, I gotta turn the page here. Kind of just trying to see. I can't really tell where I'm at time-wise. I think we're about out of time. So I'll turn the page tomorrow, and we'll get further into figuring out how the Essenes didn't exist and how Jesus didn't exist as we come back tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in today. Have a great